Hopefully everyone's here. Problem set was okay? Straightforward? No problems? This side is she, this side is Lilia. I decided to take a little sidetrack on the lecture today to talk about the Keystone Pipeline. Hope you guys are sort of on top of the story. It was unraveling over the weekend and yesterday as I was writing the lecture, so I decided to do a little side lecture on the pipeline. Hopefully you guys are following the story as well. It's sort of one of the top environmental headlines going in US politics. A lot of it's about US politics, not about climate change, but it's got a whole bunch of different stuff wrapped up in it. And what I thought was really important about the news this week is it's about the environmental impact statement that somebody's doing in the background of US policy. And they're releasing the environmental impact statement, which is related to what we're doing in this class or what we would be training you to do in this major or in this, this college. So I just wanted to walk through some of the issues a little bit. Maybe you guys could help me with the story. So tar sands. How do I make it a little darker in here? No lights? A little darker? You guys know the story about tar sands? Anybody? So this is a form of getting oil out of the ground with open mining, where there's forests in Alberta, Canada, that they go and plow the top of the forest off and then dig up these sands that have oil in the sands. It's a really, really energy-intensive way of getting oil out of the ground. So one of the big questions is, how many units of energy does it take to get units of petroleum energy out? There's one way they call it is wheel to well, well to wheel. So and then this would be from mine to wheel. How many units of energy? These are, so this here, I'll show you some more pictures. These trucks are the trucks that are like 10 times the size of a normal dump truck. They're huge, they're colossal. And so they're just plowing up thousands and thousands of acres of forest in a remote northern part of Canada to dig out this sand that's full of oil sort of mixed in with the sand. And the environmentalists are making a big issue saying this petroleum, this carbon should stay in the ground under this forest. And we shouldn't dig it up. And if we can protest and stop this pipeline and lobby the president, we'll stop this project from going forward. These are pictures from National Geographic. Here's before and after pictures. Huge areas of pristine sort of wilderness where there's nothing else going on, and then it gets plowed and turns pretty much altered forever. So this is one part of it. This is looking at the wilderness that's disturbed by this kind of mining. Here's a map of where it is. So the United States is down here. This is Montana. This is the state of Alberta and Canada, Calgary and Edmonton, the two big cities. And there's huge areas, hundreds and hundreds of square miles that could be plowed down if this whole tar sands area is developed. It's already going on. It's already happening. And so another big part of the controversy is, will anything we do stop this from happening? We live in the United States. This is Canada. Will anything we do that change our politics change what happens in their country? And a lot of this is supply and demand questions. Supply of oil meeting a price, a globally set price of oil. Here's just some pictures of what it looks like. If you look at the top, this is the sandy material. So they have to take out hundreds of tons of the sandy material, and then they sort of cook it and bake it in these huge, they build like a huge city to do the refining, huge amounts of energy and steam to bake the oil out of the sand. And if you look at the top one, these are sort of hard to see to scale, but these huge earth movers, just colossal earth movers. Again, the dump truck, if you see the person getting into the dump truck driver is like this big. So these huge colossal machinery used to move it all around, huge amounts of energy used in withdrawing the oil from the sand. So the big question that it's come down to right now in this environmental impact statement is this question of, will this oil get developed anyways? And if it does, will it get taken out of this area by pipeline or by rail cars? So that's the thing that's been in the news on Monday and over the weekend. So what the president said 6 months ago or last year was he said, we're going to put this up for study, and we're going to study this top line here. Will the pipeline lead to a net increase in carbon emissions? That was his way of hedging his bets. He says, we're going to put it out to the experts, and we're going to ask them to measure the carbon emissions from approving the pipeline, and would the pipeline itself lead to a net increase in carbon emissions? And embedded in this, and embedded in the release of this report on Monday is the question of, are these oil resources going to be developed anyways? Are these oil resources going to be developed whether or not there's a pipeline? And if we don't approve the pipeline, will the oil just get shipped by trains, by rail? That's what's going on in the proposal. So two of the big punchlines from the report are that the tar sands, they came up with a number, require 17% more carbon to produce this oil than a baseline other barrel of oil. A barrel of oil coming out of a well in the Gulf of Mexico. The oil that we're already using. And this number would be debated, and there's, environmentalists would say this number is actually a lot higher. There's a whole, there's the sequestration of the forest. There's how do you price the energy that goes into separating the oil. But so behind it, somebody's come up with a number that says how much more energy does it take to extract a barrel of oil from tar sands versus a barrel of oil from some baseline. The other big number that they came up with, and these are a bunch of different assumptions and different economic models, are will shipping it by rail cause more carbon to be emitted than shipping it by pipeline? And so they came up with a number that rail produces 8% more carbon per barrel of oil shipped than a pipeline does. Pipeline, you have to build power plants to power the pipeline, but doesn't require so much carbon in the pipeline. Rail, you have fuel used at different points along the way. Here's a map. So interestingly, these brown lines here, these are all the pipelines we already have. There's huge amounts of pipeline that network the United States. The solid line is the existing XL pipeline. So we already have a pipeline. What they're trying to do, this is where the refinery capacity, extra gasoline refinery capacity is down here. And so the oil is being produced on the other side of North America from where the refineries are. It's a colossal logistics problem. So the dotted line, there are two dotted lines. The upper dotted line is where the new pipeline that's being proposed and debated right now. The bottom dotted pipeline right here is a pipeline that's currently being built. And this was controversial because this crosses some groundwater reservoirs and some prairies. People were fighting that one, but that's gone through. They figured out how to get environmental impact statement and show that it was going to be safer. The upper one is what we're now debating. And if you look at the very top, it crosses an international boundary between the United States and Canada. And that's why it's particularly stuck right now, because approval for a pipeline that crosses an international boundary can have a further level of scrutiny than pipelines that are just within different states. So interestingly, I always like to think about California. So California, we have pipelines, but we're not connected to the rest of the country via pipeline. So no Alberta tar sands oil at this point would be getting to us via pipeline. Some question whether California should be connected or not. So here's the alternative to pipeline is rail cars. filling it is basically called now a rolling pipeline. You have to build terminals to fill them. You have to build terminals to receive the oil. But a lot is talked about in terms of what if we try to ship this big increase in millions of barrels produced via pipeline. So here's just some simple graphs. So this is an article from the New York Times from this month about how much more rail is starting to carry. So this is the production in U.S. oil fields, and here's the percent being carried by rail cars. It's now in the last year up to 10%. So now we're up to 10%. We're having more and more oil produced in the United States in the past years, and we're having more and more of these rail cars moving around. We're now up to 10% of oil being moved by rail cars. Interestingly, you see Bakersfield, that's where we in California have excess capacity. So there's some question about increasing rail car shipments to California. In California, it passes through some pristine areas around Lake Tahoe, so the increased number of rail cars could be an increased level of risk coming into California. And then here's a big story that happened in the last year. I don't know if you guys heard about this one. In July, there was a rail car that exploded in a small city in Quebec. The rail car, there was a train, and the driver had a fire on the train. The fire was put out, and the driver had timed out, so he went to the motel to sleep. And while he was asleep, the rail car that was parked out of town started rolling down of its own weight into town and got into the middle of town and derailed. A whole bunch of the tankers exploded. Here's the here you can see these exploded tankers down here. These are all the rail cars exploded right in the middle of this cute little town in Quebec. And there was a bar there. It was in the middle of the night. There was a bar there. A lot of people were partying in this, like their local bar. And a big disaster. Huge number of buildings destroyed. About a square kilometer of area destroyed. So this is really high visibility, right? This is, if we want the future to be rail cars, this is dangerous. We have spills, and now we have like human beings. So pipelines don't have this problem as much. Right now, this decision about whether to approve the Keystone XL pipeline is in the State Department. And this is interesting because in this class, we talk a lot about the different parts of the federal government that are dealing with different parts of environmental regulation. We talk about EPA. We talk about the Agriculture Department, the Interior Department that are forestries and national parks. For many big projects that deal with energy, we have the Department of Energy or Department of Commerce helping with trade. But this decision, in this case, because it's crossing an international boundary, is put on the State Department. How will the State Department, whether they will approve this conduit to our neighboring country or not. So it was on Hillary Clinton. She let this take a long enough time that she didn't have to make a decision while she was in office, so now it's in John Kerry's desk. So this is an environmental impact statement that's been produced and put on John Kerry's desk, and ostensibly it's up to John Kerry to make a decision. John Kerry, interestingly, has sort of put himself out there as an environmentalist. He wants to put climate change and Accord on Climate back on the table, so he's actually an interesting figure to be making this decision. Anybody know who this guy is? So we don't know him. It's kind of embarrassing. He's the Prime Minister of Canada. One of these things where we have the geographic ignorance of the United States. He is an economist, interestingly. He did his undergrad in economics and a master's in economics, and then he worked at an oil company because he's from Calgary, Alberta. He's from the place where the oil sands are from. And he engineered the Conservative Party's return to power in Canada. So he's created a powerful bloc on the right wing, and he's from the oil-producing state. This is like having George Bush as your president. How is energy policy going to go when you have, the right-wing president from the oil-producing state? He has, so Canada previously to him, under the left-wing government, had signed the Kyoto Protocol, agreed to carbon reductions, and had some pretty strong environmental regulations on the books. And he's, said that maybe Canada is going to withdraw from Kyoto, or else what he's also done another way is just sort of realign what their emissions reductions would be. So he's reduced what their what the Canadian government's commitments are. So the Canadian government, let's just say, is pushing very hard for this. The Canadian government wants this deal to go through. They want this resource. Well, the Conservative Party wants these resources to be developed, and it's a tough one for the United States. Canada is our closest neighbor, our strongest ally, our biggest trading partner, and so they're asking us to do this thing. So from the State Department, John Kerry question, it's really hard to say no to Canada when they're asking strongly for something. And now this is probably one of the biggest symbolic struggles for the environmental movement right now. And this is also just sort of an interesting phenomenon where different things get the highlight, different things get people to go out and protest. People know the name Keystone XL, comes up in presidential debates. The Sierra Club has raised millions of dollars on the Keystone XL. So people that are environmentally minded respond to certain issues. They're not, the whole thing about climate change, the whole thing of carbon, it's too big to really grasp, but people can grasp onto, let's block this pipeline. It's like one thing we can work on. Yep, I can talk to that. Give me a couple slides. Right now, I just want to say that, from also, if we just look at it from higher up, that, this is a way that people can have something to carry a banner about. It's very high profile in the environmental movement. Have you guys heard of either of these two people? Bill McKibben is a founder of 350.org. He's an environmentalist who's very high visibility. He's very like, what's the campaign? How can we get in the Obama administration's face? How can we call out the Obama administration for its compromises? And he's been leading the branding of this Keystone XL thing for a long time. Here's another interesting person that we may hear of. He bought a Super Bowl ad about the Keystone XL pipeline. He's a billionaire. He's from San Francisco. His name is Tom Steyer. He gives most of his money to Stanford, so we don't hear about him as much. But this is one of those people who has signed the commitment with Bill Gates to give away half of their $1 billion, half of their fortune. And he says, I want to make a huge impact on carbon. This is what I want to do with my legacy. I want to make an impact on the world. And he's going really big on this Keystone XL issue as well. So these people are making it a high-profile issue. They're riding it into a bigger and bigger, into the national press. So yesterday, there was a direct action around the country. People are getting arrested. I took the picture on the right from my Facebook feed. It's a friend of mine, Amanda. So this is from last year when people got arrested at the White House. But, people your age, people that are engaged, people that are want to do something are going and getting arrested over a pipeline in Canada. So it's just interesting, this is something that people feel like they can take action about. I want to talk to the environmental impact statement comment here. One thing that's been really interesting about this one is there's been a potential conflict of interest. So the State Department does not write environmental impact statements. They hire a consulting company to write the environmental impact statement. The consulting company that they hired is called Environmental Resources Management. Now, this company does a whole bunch of things, and it's a very high-profile company. They write things for Shell Oil. They write things for the government of England. They do big sustainability studies. How will companies face sustainability? How will companies face a changing price of carbon? They sort of position themselves as helping governments and huge corporations come up with a plan for sustainability. This group had some other part of this group had actually lobbied on behalf of a group that had been funded by TransCanada. This consulting firm is a member of the American Petroleum Institute and the Western Petroleum Association and other trade groups. So this consulting firm had been hired by the State Department, and there had been a lawsuit on behalf of environmental groups saying, can we investigate whether there's a conflict of interest here? And the State Department keeps saying, no, there's no conflict of interest. We've gone through this. So it's not like there's been a direct payment to the people writing the environmental impact statement, but as this process has been going on for over a year, it was clear that this group was, had the potential, as the question was here. Environmental impact statements, you can cook the books, you can decide which economic studies to use, you can decide, there's some complicated economic model, and you can decide, how to steer the economic model. So anyways, what happened in the past couple days was this huge environmental impact statement was posted online. I was thinking of making you guys look at it for your homework, but you probably would fall asleep immediately. But you can go look it up. 11 volumes is too much. There's a executive summary that I just want to walk through some of the charts. Why I think this is important is this preparing environmental impact statements is something that you guys could be training to do. This is like a future job for people in these fields. There's consulting jobs for government projects preparing environmental impact statements. A lot of the bread and butter of environmental economics. So what they talk about in the environmental impact statement, though, interestingly, is about the environmental impact of the pipeline. Right? Just digging up all this prairie to lay down this pipeline is a huge environmental impact. Ends up being, kilometers times, what area you do it by. Many square kilometers of the western United States actually get impacted by this pipeline crossing their land. And so for this kind of thing, we have practices in place for environmental impact statements from, Fish and Wildlife, from state governments, from state parks, from national parks. We have a whole bunch of resources for thinking about how we measure impacts on endangered species, on rangelands, of doing something like this. But importantly here is this question of greenhouse gas emissions from different ways to do it. So I'm not going to get too into this, but let's say they had carbon emissions for a flow that they're thinking about. Tons of carbon emissions under different scenarios. And then they said, this is the scenario of building a pipeline, and let's compare it to 3 scenarios of not building a pipeline, and show what the differences are in tons, millions of tons of carbons emitted between building a pipeline and not building a pipeline. For not building a pipeline, they had 3 scenarios. One is ship it by rail and then by pipeline, ship it by rail and then by tanker, or ship it by rail all the way down to Texas to where the refineries are. So they got some differences in carbon emitted that they're saying, whether they cook the books or not, they're saying the amount of carbon that's going to be emitted by trains is a lot higher than is going to be emitted by a pipeline. So what is implicit in this, and implicit in this whole report, is they're saying the oil is going to come out of the ground anyway. What Bill McKibben and Tom Steyer and the people fighting it are saying, stop the Keystone XL pipeline, leave that carbon in the ground. If we don't improve the pipeline, it'll be too expensive to do this. And a lot of that is based on what the price of oil will be in the future. So there's a lot of economic modeling going on here. This is millions of barrels per day that are currently being produced. These are different modeling scenarios. And this is the question of how much more oil will be produced into the future going towards 2030. So projecting into the future, what's the price of oil going to be? How many more projects are going to be built? These have the price of 60 to 70 dollars a barrel, 70 to $80 a barrel, greater than $80 per barrel. So we don't know what the price of oil is going to be in the future. We think that there's a lot of people think it's going to go up quite a bit. What's interesting, again, is that this price is quite a bit lower than the price in Texas. So the cost to produce this oil is lower than the global price that's getting to Texas. So you're adding $30 or $40 a barrel onto these prices to get it to Texas. So right now, they're saying this oil is going to be taken out of the ground anyways. How are we going to get it to Texas is what this report's about. All right, so one more graph here. This is a measure of greenhouse gas emissions, and they're comparing it to another place of getting the oil. So they're comparing tar sands oil to oil coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. So this graph in the middle is they're saying how much more carbon is going to come from tar sands oil versus a baseline oil production. And they're saying it's very small. Again, this is the question of whose economic model you're using. Are you minimizing environmental costs or not? But this is a question of tons per carbon versus per barrel of oil produced. Again, this is an interesting thing. They say if we don't put the pipeline in place, we're going to have a whole bunch more freight trains rolling around. Back to the question of freight trains skrill more than pipelines, freight trains cause disasters where people die more than pipelines. And then for us here, there are proposed freight train terminals in the Bay Area. We have a bunch of refineries in the Bay Area. Are we going to have a whole bunch more of these freight trains coming into California? Those will have environmental impacts. There's some very interesting history about the tar sands oil. What the Canadian oil producers would like to do is send it to China. That's where the future demand for oil is going to be. And they have one port way up there that's limited. They have limited ways of getting it through Vancouver. They want to build a pipeline to the west coast. In Canada, they have some very powerful protections for their indigenous tribes, First Nations people, they're called in Canada, and they've blocked pipelines through various pipeline routes through their lands to the Pacific coast. So, I mean, if you look at where Alberta is and their wish to ship to China, the oil sands producers would really like to ship this oil straight to the Pacific coast, a lot lower cost. But now they're trying to ship it all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. So that's it on Keystone XL. Anybody questions? Anybody want to discuss something about it? Yeah. I have no idea. I think that's definitely the kind of thing that's controlled by some robot. Like